By May of 1942, the Reich Pact would continue its push towards Central Asia. Meanwhile, the Russians prepared to push toward Riga and finally push into Lithuania, and hopefully with the collapse of Lithuania, collapse the Reich Pact Eastern Front once and for all. Meanwhile, the Ottomans keep trying to hold off in Azerbaijan, with them hoping to keep the oil supply of Azerbaijan going, not hoping to like potentially destroy the oil supply of the land. Meanwhile, the Russians in the east would lose some land, but not many, with them overall holding out the Japanese. One of the bigger push that's been occurring recently is the American push into Mexico, with them quickly pushing into the Templars area, with them getting close to capturing Leon before eventually capturing Mexico City and collapsing Mexico. Meanwhile, the American would see itself make more tanks to keep the war going, and would see itself continue to slow push south. Meanwhile, I don't actually know, is there anything with the Entente for America? Are they even supposed to be able to be in the Entente, or? Yeah, I don't think they're supposed to be in the Entente. Or at least not this America, so there's that. Meanwhile, by 1942, Hyderabad was continuing its slow operation against both Iran and Central Asia, with the Japanese trying to hold in the east, with them doing a naval invasion in Hainan to try to take Nanjing, with China continuing its small pushes against Manchuria. Against Manchuria. Oh. Meanwhile, as the months go by, neither side have a great advantage, both of them preparing for a war that might continue which will continue for years on. By October of 1942, the Russians would see themselves kind of be making small gains in the west, with Central Asia still becoming a problem. So with a Russian counter push, they were able to successfully push them out of the northern Kazakhstan area, the eastern Kazakhstan area, with them pushing into Lithuania. Meanwhile, Germany would see their front line slowly collapse, as they both had to deal with both a slowly gaining Russian front and a third international gaining Croatia and Bosnia. Meanwhile, America would split off the Mexican forces stationed in Durgango, with France trying to deal with a rebellion in modern-day Chad, in the Wudai region. Meanwhile, after the capture of Nanjing, Japan would do another invasion to Guangzhou, hoping to connect both the south and the east into one giant front, so China would be able to eventually reclaim Nanjing, stopping the Japanese from gaining potential vital supply line for their push, with the Chinese making slow gains against them, with the Japanese trying to encircle a a potential like Chinese army near Shantou. Meanwhile, the army will do a counter push in the Caucasus region, the Caucasian, with them gaining control over Georgia and getting close to pushing into Abkhazia. Meanwhile, Russia would do a great breakthrough against Lithuania, gain control of Vinnytsia, Caucasus, and most of northern Lithuania. Meanwhile, the Dominican Republic would unite the island of Hispania for a little bit, or actually, okay, they actually just fall and conquered it. Okay, never mind. I was gonna say that they take it over for a little bit, but no. Meanwhile, by January of 1943, the Russians would see themselves their push slowly start to get less powerful by January of 1943, their forces would once again start to their push would once again start to slow down, so it would not stop. And around the same time, the Third International would make big gains in the Balkans, with them quickly taking control over Bosnia, pushing close to Belgrade, and taking control over the city of Osijek, with more pressure being added to the Danube and then Federation. It starts to become less and less likely that the Balkan front line will be able to hold for much longer against the Third International, with no intent or American support against the Third International. It started to become more and more clear to people outside the Reich Pact that the war will be over soon. It will not be that the war in Europe will be over soon. It will not be over for and in the peace deal, but it will not be over in the German conditions, but rather than that, the Russian and syndicalist conditions. By March of 1943, they would encircle some Bulgarian forces near Venden, with them pushing in against them, resulting in the death of multiple regiments and divisions. Meanwhile, the Ottoman would just see itself slowly lose land, as the Moscow Accord would finally begin to make rapid gains against them, or at least some gains. Meanwhile, the Germans would see themselves lose the entire Rhine region, with the French doing rapid attacks, and then quickly focusing on a breakthrough in the Benelux region to collapse the German front once and for all. Meanwhile, with the Reich Pact overall losing ground against the forces of the Moscow Accord and the Third International. Meanwhile, in North America, America would take over Mexico City, with them getting close to taking over the city of Guadalajara. The narrator Luck was able to say perfectly, no mistakes at all, with the German East Asia coaching a naval invasion of southern India rather than, I don't know, I guess their narrator forgot that, actually no, they're not even trapped there, they're not that part. The AI, or sorry, not the AI, the narrator thinks the Germans might just be stupid, just a little bit, just a little stupid. Meanwhile, the Japanese would see some of their forces encircled before they were able to liberate them, but that still resulted in and some problems with some of the front line. Meanwhile, the Chinese would see itself lose Beijing and Tianjin against a Japanese counterattack, with the Russians taking control of Transmir and pushing east against the Transmir Republic. It started becoming clear that while the war in East Asia still not 100% decided, the war in Europe with the conditions occurring in Asia along with everywhere else in the world, well, by everywhere else in the world I mean really just Europe, it seemed pretty clear that the Reich Pack would not hold for much longer, with them losing ground, even if not rapidly, still losing vital ground to pushes by both the Moscow Accord and the Third International, with the Russians doing a big push through against the Germans in Central Asia in June of 1943. Meanwhile, by July of 1943, Russia would continue their attack against Reich Pack soldiers in Isya, with them trying to break through and them succeeding on July 10th of 1943, taking control over a vital city, ruining the supply lines in southern Moldavia. Meanwhile, France would do some minor pushes past the Rhine, with them hoping to create a few breachheads for potential larger pushes against the Germans, with the Russians continuing their offensive in Prussia, with them taking control over Elben and them pushing against Poland. And by July 1943, Poland troops start to receive less and less support as it started to become less and less likely for Poland to be able to survive much longer. Soon, Bolivia, hoping to potentially use what they would hope would be the Third International, trying to claim as much of Europe as possible to try to do a war against Colombia and Federation, hoping to keep both these countries away from the syndicalist threat in Europe. Meanwhile, the Poland would collapse, with that resulting in less troops for the Third International, with the Russians seeing this as a chance to make big gains along multiple different fronts, or along the front against the Reich Pack, with them gaining control of Danzig and preparing for a push to Stolps. And by 1943, Russia prepared for one last push to reclaim Berlin, with them around then surrounding a ton of forces in Volhynia. Without supply line, with little supply line, the Russians would begin to make minor gains, pushing against the city, with them cutting off forces where it was deemed possible, and them slowly but surely pushing. Meanwhile, America in 1943 would collapse the Mexican government, with them making Mexico a puppet of America before preparing to continue the war in Central America and help the Entente, before potentially helping the Entente in a naval invasion Meanwhile, the Germans would see themselves lose ground, even if not rapidly, so even though not rapid, those were still losses. And by 1943, by September, October region, the situation started to get desperate as the Russians would get surround multiple divisions in Rufin and would continue their assault, getting more and more ground as time goes by, with them even doing an attack on Brumberg, which was considered by the Germans then as a vital supply line in to hold the area east of the Seine. Meanwhile, Morocco around 19 October would peace out with the Central Power, would peace out with both the Third International and Moscow Court to avoid their own collapse, with the UK-10 being released by the Mexican government, with America hoping to avoid any potential Big Mexico by taking away the oil region of Yucatan. Meanwhile, the German would slowly start to get more and more desperate as they would lose more and more ground. Austrian forces would get pushed south of Brno, with this leading to more losses as the Russians would be able to encamp south of Brno. Meanwhile, the Austrians would see themselves lose more and more ground, and by November, the situation became completely, the situation had become desperate, with the Russians getting closer and closer to a push into Berlin, into the Brandenburg region, and into potentially even Berlin. By December 18th of 1943, Russia would do a full-scale pushing on both the Austrian-Hungarian and German front, with them gaining multiple towns, with them gaining ton of area. Meanwhile, the Communion of France would do a naval invasion from Hamburg, taking control of the Schleswig-Holstein area, with them doing another push against the Netherlands, hoping to break the Dutch front. And by early of 1944, the situation had started becoming desperate as the Russians were beginning to push more and more into Germany, with them getting close to capturing the city of Stettin, with the Commune of France naval invasion into Hamburg, resulting in pushes to be prepared for taking over both Bremen and Berlin. Right now, it was no longer about if Germany was going to win, but about who was going to get to Berlin first, as the Germans would lose more and more ground. With Russia constantly pushed, the German Eastern Front would see more losses, with them being unable to keep the Eastern resistance going, with them experiencing troubles across the front line from these rapid pushes. Meanwhile, the vital supply line in Silesia would see itself under threat, with Germany not being able to reinforce, but still putting the threat of the railway being lost still being important. Meanwhile, the Germans would lose the town of Bernfried, seeing Austria-Hungary lose more land before the Russians do another combined push, specifically designed for Austria-Hungary or the Danube Federation to collapse the front line, with them hoping to gain Budapest and weaken Dan View Federation front line even more. Meanwhile, the Communist France would see a massive breakthrough to take over the city of Magdeburg and prepare for assault onto Berlin with a crossing of the river, the river from to reach Berlin. Russian forces would see itself constantly put more and more pressure onto the Budapest area, with them hoping to take the city power soon. To see that the city would probably not be able to be gained, so they would focus more and more of their support onto Slovakia and trying to cut it from Pressburg. Meanwhile, Frankfurt would be captured, and with that, the road to Berlin had been completely opened by both the west and the east. Now, it's just about who can get enough willpower to break into Berlin as the German forces would see itself crumble, with the Union of Britain taking over Bremen and threatening to take over Hanover, and the Russian forces taking over Frankfurt, threatening Budapest, and threatening Pressburg. There become clearer and clearer that Berlin that Germany will die within the next few months. A last German resistance by some of the forces would commence to try to fold onto the land, so without any support from much of the population, and with the German loss already written on paper, with the only thing needed now is official surrender. It's all but gone now, with the Russians quickly moving down south after the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire to quickly try to push into Munich from Austria-Hungary, former Austro-Hungary territory. The Germans, however, would continue their defensive, with them trying to stop at all costs the Russians or the French from pushing into Berlin. So by then, it was only a matter of weeks before the inevitable fall of Berlin. So Germany, despite it all, would continue to try resistance, despite the inevitable fall of Munich, the fall of Nuremberg, and overall the collapsing of the front line. Germany still attempted to hold on, with supplies being cut around April 15th of 1944. Berlin was surrounded, but the only thing needed now was a full frontal assault on the city. The Russian meanwhile in the south would capture the city of Nuremberg, with them hoping to gain more and more ground before they pushed into Berlin to try to make their conditions better. Meanwhile, the German front line would just crumble more and more as the Russians would just make rapid gains, and by May of 1944, the city of Berlin fell under the control of the Moscow Accord and the Third International, with it just being left to take over the last area. And soon, much of the peace will start to be achieved, with the land being decided then on May 9th, with it being decided to split the continent into between the Eastern Moscow Accord and the Western Third International. Now with this, and Russia would also around this time decide to make Romania join the alliance, hoping to stop any potential socialist rebellion inside Romania, with Russia big, focusing all their division on pushing the Ottomans and conquering the Straits, and finally give Russia a warm seaport down south. Meanwhile, the socialists would do a naval invasion against Norway, with them hoping to try to create a big region to not only push into Norway with, but into Sweden with as well. Right now, on June 4th of 1944, the road, while there were still some powers fighting, the road was mostly divided into two: the Moscow Accord and the Third International.